Hi guys, welcome back. Now we are going to be starting a new topic, of relatively important topic because it is tested in the MCQs and in every year one MCQ or two MCQ comes from here. So let's begin. It's basically about the economic methodology, and when we say about economic methodology, we're concerned with you know how whatever approach economics policymakers are taking or whatever statements we are passing or whatever we are seeing, our entire economic framework, is it based on positive economics or normative economics? Or let's say, to keep it simple, the statements that we are making, are they classified as positive statements and normative statements, right? So when we talk about positive statements, guys, positive statements are basically those statements that are made that can be. Now, first of all, before I teach you what positive statements are, one thing I want to clarify here, that most textbooks do a really bad job explaining this. Also, the way it is taught, I mean, most of the students are always confused in this. So please, when you are explaining about positive statements, since I already mentioned, textbooks don't really do justice to this because the clarification is very unclear. So don't. A lot of students think positive statements are those that are facts. Now, while this is not wrong, but this is not the correct way or to define a positive statement. In fact, it's not necessary that all positive statements are facts, right? So what exactly is a positive statement then? So positive statement is a statement that you can put to test, and once you have tested it, you can amend it, you can reject it, you can test it by referring to whatever empirical evidence you have available. When we say empirical evidence, you're talking about using data and scientific methods and observational evidence to investigate whatever you're saying, or to investigate a statement, or to investigate any economic relationship, to either support your statement, to either agree to it, or either refuse it or refute it, right? Also, positive statements are fact-based. Fact-based, they are factual statements. Not all positive statements are factual statements. But yes, a factual statement or a fact-based statement would be classified as a positive statement. But again, like I said, the only way to differentiate between a positive statement and a normative statement, which is the second type of statements that you will study, is that can you test the statement? And if you can test it, and based on evidence, you can either accept it, reject it, refute it, refuse it, say it is wrong, or maybe say it is right, or maybe need some sort of an amendment. So that is what positive statements are. So they can be tested and they are verifiable, basically based on empirical evidence. Another way to explain positive statements are by saying that they are objective statements. Now we all know what objective means. While on the other hand, when we'll study about normative statements, we'll say that they are subjective. They involve a value judgment. So positive statements are objective statements. And you can say that positive statements involve cause and effect theories, right? As in, something, cause and effect theory means that any statement that involves, or any economic analysis or economic relationship that involves something causing something and that leading to some certain effects, because that a cause and effect theory or a cause and effect statement can be tested. You can clearly, and you can calculate, you can test it based on whatever evidence is available. You can see what had caused this to happen, and the impact of this or the effect of this, how is it coming from and where is it coming from. You can actually, based on verifiable data, you can test it, and you can see, and you can take out the evidence for it as well, right? For example, saying that in Pakistan, let's say if during COVID times, there was a lot of recession and firms were closing. So you're saying that during recession, firms closed down and the GDP contracted by, let's say, 2%. So this is a positive statement because you're identifying a cause and effect here, something causing something, and then that leading to an effect of something on something. And you have empirical data, and you are taking out, you have data and observational, based on observational evidence and empirical data, you can verify it as well and say that you're right, or maybe you're wrong, right? Or maybe you're right, you're not completely right, but you're half wrong, and this needs to be amended. No, it wasn't 2%, it was actually 4%, let's say, the decline in GDP. So when you're talking about a positive statement, we are referring to positive economic analysis or positive economic judgment. A positive economic analysis or positive economic statement basically is referring to that branch of economics that is focusing on describing and explaining an economic phenomena, based on observable facts and cause and effect relationships, right? And it directly contrasts with normative statements, which we will study in a while, because normative statements involve value judgments about, let's say, what the economy should be like or what policy actions should be taking. Well, positive economics is talking about what the economy is, right, rather than telling us what it should be like or what policy actions should be taking. It tells us exactly how the world exactly is, right? So positive economic analysis or positive economics or positive statements are, like I said, they seek to be, they're objective. They avoid any sort of judgments about what is good or bad, right? And they are strictly dealing with, factual data that we have, aiming to describe how things are right now or how things are, or let's say maybe to predict. It can also, a positive statement could also be to predict how they will be, but then based on existing patterns or based on existing data, without really implying, without, the key term here is that without implying how they ought to be, right? So positive statement would be describing how things are, or it can predict how they will be on existing patterns, based on observing the existing patterns rather than implying how they ought to be. Make sense? So the empirical verification is the key here, right? So, and when you're talking about empirical verification, you're talking about economic statements. They must be testable, right? They must be testable through observation, evidence, and experimentation. And this empirical approach will allow economists to, support a statement or a theory or any analysis made, or either refute it based on evidence, right? So, for example, if let's say someone says that higher education levels will cause higher incomes in the economy, now an economist can easily, this would be a positive statement because an economist might be able to analyze data to see if there's any correlation between education levels and income, right? And based on that, it may either agree to it or refute it, that there's no correlation between education and incomes and they are completely unrelated, and hence the statement that higher education levels will lead to higher incomes is wrong and false. So it's not necessary that all positive statements need to be true as well. The key is that can we put it to test, and do we have data or evidence suggesting, or do we have enough evidence to test it? That is what positive statement is all about. So, for example, if we say that an increase in Pakistan's minimum wage will lead to higher unemployment among low-skilled workers, now we really don't know, will it or will it not? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. But we can test it, hence it is a positive statement. Similarly, inflation rates for the economy have averaged around 2%. Now, whether they have or they have not, we don't know, but we can test it at least, right? Similarly, another example could be that, let's say if someone says the GDP of country X grew by 3.5% last year. Now, the thing is that we can actually verify through economic reports and statistics based on, go on in that specific year, based on the specific data, we can actually verify that, right? Similarly, if someone says that an increase in minimum wage will lead to an increase in unemployment, if someone says this, let's say, an increase in minimum wage will lead to an increase in unemployment among, let's say, teenagers. Let's say an increase in minimum wage in the particular country will lead to a 1% increase in unemployment among teenagers, right? Now, this kind of a statement is asserting a cause and effect relationship. But the thing is that it can be tested by analyzing the employment data available before and after the increase in minimum wage. And economists can examine this relationship then using statistical methods to confirm the statement, whether it's true or not, or maybe refute the statement, right? So that is what positive statement is. And one thing that, there's, like I mentioned before as well, that, positive statement, the thing about positive statement is that a positive statement will attempt to describe anything or the world as it is. It's going to make a claim about reality, but that can be tested or measured using, or amended, or refuted using empirical evidence. So testability is the key here. But the thing is that positive statement does not have to be true to be considered a positive statement. It just needs to be something that can, in theory, be proven right or wrong through observation, data, or experimentation. And so it follows that when in the books it is written that a positive statement is a fact, so it means that, so a fact, well, let's say if you use the word fact, right? And if you use the word fact, so a fact is basically a true positive statement. It's a true fact is something that is true, right? So it's a true positive statement. It is something that has been verified and confirmed as being accurate based on evidence and reality. That's what the books means. But the thing is that not all positive statements are fact. A positive statement could be false as well if, upon investigation, the evidence shows that it is incorrect, right? So you saying, let's say the sun revolves around the earth. Now, the sun does not revolve around the earth. We can actually test it, right? Through scientific evidence, right? Through astronomical evidence. Scientists have confirmed that the earth revolves around the sun and it's not the other way around. So that is why, but still it's a positive statement. Okay, so I hope you have understood what positive statements are. And now, guys, we'll divert our attention to normative statements basically. Normative statements, normative, right, itself is suggesting subjective statements, and remember they carry value judgments. Value judgment, it's a value in, so when you say a value judgment, it has the element of an opinion involved, it could have an element of biasness involved as well. So they basically involve personal beliefs, you could say moral considerations as well. Maybe you are speaking in some moral ethical context which seems relevant to you but not to me, and that is what makes it a normative statement. Or maybe some policy preference could be, I prefer policy A to policy B, or I prefer policy B to policy C. But the thing is that it's you who prefer it, so there's a value judgment involved. So, and normative statements, they are not testable. They are not testable through empirical analysis, right? And so the thing is that at times the distinction between positive and normative statements is very difficult. At times that distinction isn't always clear cut. And some statements may have elements of both. And in MCQs, you might be stuck at times where it may look like a positive statement and a normative statement as well. So in that case, what you need to do is that you need to think about what matters then is that what is the intent, right? What is basically the intent that is behind the statement which is made, and whether it primarily describes a fact or expresses a subjective judgment, right? So positive statements, they help us understand how the world actually is through empirical analysis, not what it ought to be or should be. While normative statements are used to express opinions and maybe guide policy decisions based on ethical considerations or value-based consideration or political considerations, let's say. So normative statements will always be those assertions, guys, that will express value judgments, opinions, maybe prescriptions about what ought to be, unlike positive statements which are based on facts and are testable, right? So normative statements will be subjective and they will involve opinions about what should happen in the economy, how things should happen, or maybe what policy should be adopted. And remember that these statements cannot be proven or disproven. They cannot be proven or disproven using empirical data alone. Why? They cannot be proven or disproven using empirical data alone because obviously they are personal values, they are personal beliefs, they are they're based on personal values because the statements are based on personal values, they're based on ethics, they're based on societal preferences. And one of the key characteristics, these normative statements have three key characteristics. One is that, they are value based, which means value judgment, which means when these statements are made, it involves a value judgment, they're value based. So normative statements are rooted basically in the belief about what is good or bad, or maybe what is fair or unfair. That is what normative statement is all about. And these values can differ significantly among individuals or groups, hence making that statement a subjective statement. And the second is that, those statements are prescriptive. And I've written this over here as well, that normative statements are basically prescriptive. Prescriptive means that, they often suggest specific policies or specific actions that should be taken either by the firms, individuals, or the government, or anyone in the economy, right? Or in the country. So, they include, and so at times in the MCQs, look for words like should. They'll always include words like should, ought to, or must, right? So words like should, ought to, although at times should could, there might be some statements which are made with should, but they would be positive. So again, you need to look at the intent behind the statement. So, but usually words like should, ought to, or maybe must, they are basically they're expressing an opinion on what the economy, government, and society ought to do, right? And the third is that they are not testable. They are not testable. Unlike positive statements, normative statements cannot be tested or verified by empirical data, right? So normative statements cannot be proven true or false. Why? Because obviously they reflect opinions or ideals, basically, rather than factual observations, right? So, for example, if you look at a few statements that I've written, so for example, I've written over here, high unemployment is more harmful to a country such as Pakistan than high inflation, right? So now high unemployment is more harmful to a country such as Pakistan than high inflation is, a value judgment. It's a value-based opinion. I mean, it's an opinion. There could be someone else saying no, high inflation is more harmful than high unemployment, right? And the second, taxes on high income earners should be raised to reduce income inequality. Or maybe, a statement, this statement saying that the government should reduce income inequality by taxing the rich is again a normative statement because it reflects a value judgment that, income inequality. Now, the thing is that why is it a value judgment? It's a value judgment because you're saying that what exactly is the value judgment here? The value judgment is that you're saying that income inequality is undesirable and that raising taxes on the wealthier individuals is the solution. That is the value judgment. And the thing is that it cannot be tested or proven right or wrong using data alone, right? Because it depends on the opinions about fairness and justice, right? So this is why basically, and let's say that, and the first statement was that the government, like this was written. The government ought to prioritize reducing unemployment over controlling inflation, right? So again, this statement is prescribing a specific course of action. It's a prescriptive statement, again, which means it's a normative statement. So this statement is again prescribing a specific sort of action that needs to be taken. On the belief is that reducing unemployment is more important than controlling inflation. And obviously different individuals or policymakers might disagree based on this, based on their own policy priorities or values, right? So again, it's a normative statement. Similarly, if it's written in the exam that healthcare should be free for all citizens. Now again, this is an ethical belief. Healthcare should be free for all citizens is an ethical belief. Hence, it's a normative statement. You need to look at the intent behind the statement. It's an ethical belief. So this statement is reflecting an ethical belief about the role of the government, in providing healthcare. Now, the thing is that with empirical data, yes, I agree that with empirical data, empirical data could show that, look at the costs and benefits of free healthcare. We can see through the empirical data, but the thing is, the statement itself is based on a value judgment about what is morally right, which makes it a normative statement irrespective of the empirical data that could suggest us the cost and benefit of free healthcare. Right? So this is the judgment criteria that you need to use when you are addressing the MCQs in the exam. And so guys, if I were to sum things up towards the end of this video, and I say that, I write two statements here, both involve about minimum wages. So let's come to think of it. Let's say that, let's write raising, the minimum wage will increase labor cost for a business, right? So this is one statement, and the next statement is that, let's say, we can say the minimum wage should be raised, right? It should be raised to help low income workers, right? Now, we all know what minimum wages are in the economy. It reflects the minimum that we need to pay by law, right? And so again, raising the minimum wage will increase the labor cost for business is a positive statement. Why? Because this is a positive statement because this is testable. You can test it whether increasing minimum wage will increase labor cost for the business or not, because you can I mean, you'll find this is a factual statement. It can be analyzed using data, right? On the other hand, the second statement, this statement is a normative statement because this is a value judgment, because it is expressing an opinion about what ought to happen, what, as in what minimum wage should be raised. So it ought to be raised. So what ought to happen, and this is the value because it is expressing an opinion about, this is the best way to increase fairness and social justice in the economy, because it is based on the belief about fairness and social justice, about what is the best way to do, how to go about it by raising the minimum wage. So it's a normative statement. So I guess that's the distinction between positive and normative statements. An interesting topic. Often students get confused, but I hope by the end of this video you will be able to understand. By the end of this video, you have understood what this concept is, and we'll do a more practice questions in our Friday quizzes as well. And so that's it, guys. In Friday quiz, we will be discussing more of the past paper MCQs for this topic, and now we will move on to our next topic, that is production possibility curves. So the next videos will be on production possibility curves. I hope to see you all in that video. Until then, take care.